Welcome back to the Furry Breadpilled podcast. I guess we still don't have a name. I was going for Furries Get Breadpilled, but what do you guys think about a name for the podcast? Just so we can have something official.
How about just Take the Bread Pill?
Take the Bread Pill?
Furries Take the Bread Pill?
Furries Take the Bread Pill, that sounds good.
I feel like First Instinct is a good way to settle on a good name, you know?
Yeah.
Agreed. Alright, so today we're talking about Chapter 3 and 4 of Kropotkin. And if you all want to introduce yourself before we get into it.
Sure. I guess I'll go first again. So, just a reminder, I am Feilong the Gecko. I am a synthesis/united anarchist, and theory is my bread and butter.
God damn it.
I guess I'll go. I'm Cardin, the Shark Fox, and also a bit of an Ancom. No gods, no masters in the streets.
Shark in the streets, fox in the sheets, if you will.
No, fox in the streets, shark in the sheets.
What about Shark Fox in the sheets and Shark Fox in the streets?
Sounds about right. I do bite a little.
Alright, I'm Zulakath, the dragon, and just some kind of anarchist. Don't really worry about the sub-labels too much.
I thought you were an egoist.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it, but that's not like a totalizing ideology or anything.
Well, none of this is. It's all very... Ideology is fluid, you see. If you follow strict ideology, usually things don't end up well.
Ideology is the trash can from which we eat.
Exactly. And we are furries, so we are trash.
So we have an opossum here? I wasn't aware we had a possum here.
Well, we're memeing, like, obviously.
Like, I know I said we should probably play up the Murray Purry Furry shit, but, like, not this much, damn.
Well, I mean, we gotta differentiate ourselves. We got a lot of anarchists on the internet. We got a lot of furries on the internet. We gotta express ourselves and become something, a synthesis, if you will, of anarcho-furryism.
We need some possums to eat out of trash cans. That's what we need.
We need more dog dick. What are you talking about?
We do need a poss. Oh, what the fuck?
I know a possum we can probably get on here.
That would be pretty cool.
Actually, I might know a pine marten would be good for this podcast.
Alright, so for me, you guys all know me. I'm Confight. I'm on Twitter, YouTube. Got another podcast, Sig Marxism, and this is the one I'm producing and helping to host. So, alright, last week we covered chapters 1 and 2 of the Conquest of Bread, and now we're going into chapter 3, which is Anarcho-communism.
So I want to point out that the first thing that I noticed is like the first two lines of anarchist communism like popped out at me, especially the fact that he was one of the first to be like, so anarchy leads to communism and communism leads to anarchy. They kind of just both become each other, and I think that actually even goes that solidifies the idea of what communism used to mean, with the stateless, classless, moneyless society, with an emphasis on the stateless.
Yeah, it's like the end point of classical Marxism is the communist society, and what kind of Khrushchev especially was like, oh yeah, usually like the colloquial definition that we get for communism nowadays comes from the fact that Khrushchev, after post-Stalin Soviet Union, was basically said, we're kind of in communism right now. We're trying to dismantle the state. Of course, he didn't do that, and it was still very authoritarian. So that's where that conflation comes in.
It's almost like authoritarian communism doesn't work, but have we really tried anarcho-communism?
Well, every single time we have a revolution, the anarchists just get stomped afterwards by the authoritarians. It's literally it happened with the Cubans, happened in Spain, happened in Russia, happened pretty much everywhere. So,
Pretty sure we did that in America too.
Well, I also want to point out that, the classical definition of communism, the entire society has to be communist for it to actually be communism. Otherwise, you're just some kind of state socialism or some kind of anarcho-socialism.
And that's kind of why I tend to roll a little bit more towards socialism, because to a certain point, it's easier to guarantee that it will happen.
Yeah.
And also, I don't want the government getting between me and, porn.
I mean, for my opinion, I just think, I'm almost, more akin to, an SR in the Soviet tradition of, I believe the best way to get rid of the state is through actually co-opting the state. So I think the best way to do it is you basically get yourself elected into policy, and then you dismantle the state through rapid reform very quickly.
Well, and
That
I would
makes sense,
like to
'cause-
actually point out that that's actually antagonistic
Bloodless.
to what Kropotkin was actually saying, because he's basically saying that, at least in the last chapter, you can't really go through the state and reach anarchy, because eventually,
Aw.
you just have more state.
Well, the trouble with that sort of thing, and it's interesting to look at some of these earlier anarchists and communists, and they predict things being oh so bad. And it sounds really awful when you read them, and then you step outside and it's like, oh, it's worse. Like, god damn, I would love to live in the apocalypse that Marx predicted in the Communist Manifesto. Like, he's like, yeah, it's gonna suck when we have this. And I was like, oh man, that would be an improvement.
Also, going on further in the chapter, one of the things that I think is almost a little bit that I disagree with Kropotkin, not just on the use of the state, because I disagree with him on that a little bit, because I don't think that generally when you have revolutions, it's easy for the state to just go in and basically use, especially nowadays, just counterinsurgency efforts to really destroy you by just doing scorched earth and killing everyone, and it just leads to a lot of bloodshed. So that's not the best way to deal with the state, in my opinion. But he also kind of he talks about how communism is inevitable. And for me, I think this kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Fukuyama and his idea of the end of history, where it's like, in the 90s, they were just like, liberal democracy is everywhere. The Soviet Union has fallen. Socialism has failed. We're at the end of history. Capitalism's inevitable, and this all is inevitable. And I think that thinking that communism is inevitable is dangerous in order to actually achieving it, because in order to achieve a communist system, you need to have that upkeep and that to be vigilant, because people can still use the system to try to recreate a state or recreate some kind of class consciousness. Or not even class consciousness, but just a repressive class society.
Yeah, and I would also like to point out
that when people say that,
I would also like to point out the specific phrasing is that Kropotkin uses about communism being inevitable. He's saying that he specifically is saying that any society founded on quote unquote individualism is inevitably impelled in the direction of communism. And I kind of want to have a little discussion about what it means to be an individualist society, and maybe even Zuli, as someone who kind of dove a little bit into the egoist ideology, maybe have a discussion on what it means to be an individualist, or at least on the personal and the societal level.
I mean, individualism is used in a lot of different ways in different contexts, so I haven't figured out fully what Kropotkin means by individualism. I'm just kind of going on okay, I've narrowed down to half of what people have ever meant by individualism right now. Because, I mean, my understanding is individualism and collectivism aren't actually opposites properly, and aren't even always antagonistic to each other. So, when he says individualism, I don't know exactly what he means by it, because there's a large range of things where, yes, it can have that tendency.
the big issue is that the idea that all of these ideas are inherently antagonistic or mutually exclusive feels like more of a modern thing where we can't hold two ideas in our heads without them being literally the same idea, otherwise we're contradicting ourselves.
Yeah, it's the polarization of political discourse where I think also like the idea that ideologies usually are 100% internally consistent. Like, no ideology is 100% internally consistent. That's why we have these discussions. That's why we talk about theory and stuff like that, is because they're fluid and they change from person to person, and different people have different rationale for believing why they believe. And it's almost like, weirdly, in the more kind of a scientific context, like the Heisenberg principle, where it's like, oh, you can have two things at different places at the same time, but they're in the same place as well, if that makes any sense, where it's like almost you have two separate ideas, but you can perform a synthesis. And
Yeah, I mean, like, the synthesis is not, it's not intuitive, and so you can't always think of things intuitively, but you actually have to, like, really dig into ideas.
yeah, this is why people like Ben Shapiro like never get it, because it's always, facts and logic, but they don't realize that the facts can be manipulated. Any good lawyer, like, I think I've said this on a podcast before, but
Well,
any
Ben
good
Shapiro
lawyer-
knows full well facts can be manipulated. I mean,
Well, he does it all the time.
yeah.
He's
like,
just being
that's an
dishonest.
unmanipulable fact right there, is that he manipulates facts.
Hell, that whole statement is manipulative because he only presents the facts that have his argument
Well,
in them.
Yeah,
Well, but
cherry
it's-
picking is
it's-
big.
it's not just Ben Shapiro. This is kind of like a whole conservative / rightist thing to do. And I kind of had a discussion about this in one of the chat rooms earlier, that like it's not necessarily
Earlier today, or?
a lying about the facts. It's a misrepresentation of what the facts are in the context, right? It's looking at a graph of melting ice, or the mass of an iceberg, and being like, look at this one small 2-month sample. Hey, look, it actually gained as much ice as it did 2 months prior, as it lost 2 months prior.
Yes, I've seen that H-Bomber guy video.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you zoom out, you look at the last 10 years, you see a trend going down, and it's kind of like this narrative that they want to present, that they want to focus on that small single detail. They want to be like, well, we're the greatest society right now because I have a MacBook and I can buy McDonald's, without realizing that we have this whole system of wealth inequality and oppressive forces that are driving people to poverty, despite, having the super rich.
It's the commodity fetishism where you only see the product and you only see what is produced. You don't see the workers or what goes into it or anything like that.
Honestly, though, if to be perfectly blunt, McDonald's itself is probably an argument against capitalism because gross.
Oh man, I remember I was arguing with I don't know if you guys know who J.F. Garepi is. For whatever reason, I decided to fucking hurt myself and go on his stream where he was like talking. We were having a discussion about capitalism. He's just like, capitalism makes the best stuff, and I was like, well, no. If you can just kneecap your competition, capitalism can't do that. And he tried to make the argument that McDonald's was good for capitalism, and
McDonald's, oh my god, McDonald's is, you know what McDonald's is good for? Stoners.
yes.
Well,
Very true.
I would also like to point out that in the same line of Kropotkin, like Proudhon actually had this huge argument about how competition inevitably leads to a singular entity, a monopoly, so to speak, because in any form of competition there can only be one winner. You can't have 3 or 4 different individual companies competing for the same market and ultimately maintain that same level of competition. Eventually it drops off to zero in terms of competition, or it reaches a point where they cohort with one another and present an oligarchy where, like, if you look at a lot of modern day institutions, you have these institutions that are talking to each other and being like, well,
telecommunications.
Yeah, they're going to be like, I'm going to sit here and make a point that I'm going to price this thing this one way. If you keep it at your price, we won't have to compete with one another. Or even with the internet, like telecommunications. They etch out little factions, little regions of the country where they're like, we're going to have this one country and this one part of the country, and we're not going to compete with you in other parts as long as you leave us alone here.
They're making deals, you know?
Mm-hmm. But, and this actually, really bad segue. I kind of want to talk about how this actually is antagonistic to what Kropotkin is talking about, at least the idea of competition, where it's like, coming off of what he was talking about prior, where, because we have this ancestry of people, devoting to society, we have a point like the bridges for which a toll was levied in the old days have become public property and are free to all. And it's kind of like this entire opposite to what capitalism offers right now, where it's like, if I build a bridge, I'm just going to continue to charge for it in the foreseeable future and potentially into eternity. But he's arguing that once you build a public good, as soon as it's paid off and everybody's been paid for their services and the goods that have been provided, it effectively has a zero value.
That's one big thing in capitalism. You get this bizarre fucking scenario where you make something and you put X amount of effort into it. So, supposedly, if we're going to be pro-market here, and, markets are inevitable, just like Thanos, should get your money's worth off it and, maybe even a tidy profit. I can see the argument for that. But you get this weird situation where you put a little effort into one thing and then leave it alone, and it's supposed to be infinitely profitable? What?
Yeah, it's like, it's like the whole ANCAP idea of what do you do if there's roads? And, like, Kropotkin just completely destroys that in this book. Like we were talking about earlier, Gek, when you were saying about quoting that passage, it was just like, I was just thinking, oh man, I could just hear the screaming of ANCAPs in the background. Just
do they all sound like Rasa?
Oh, yes. Our good old punching bag Rasa, who I feel like he's a friend of the show now.
Honestly, yeah, we should have him on the show just to.
Oh, Jesus Christ!
I think he has us all blocked, so I don't think that's going to be a possibility.
That's a shame because like we hate him, but we also love him.
He tried to have Cardin assassinated or something.
No, it wasn't Cardin. It was Jazzy.
Oh yeah.
He didn't try to have me assassinated. I'm crushed.
Oh yeah, he was just like, because we were getting super mad at him because he was saying things like, Algeria or no, it was Libya. And he was like, well, Libya was like, it's just their culture, the reason why they're poor. And I was just like, that's incredibly racist. He's like, no, it's not. And he's just
it's not their culture, it's the fact that they recently updated their privacy policy.
Turns out in the new privacy policy, you can own slaves. Woo!
But, yeah, and, like, I think the biggest thing that we need to highlight is that the difference between at least the anarcho-communism that Kropotkin is presenting and the current form, or even the anarcho quote-unquote form of capitalism, is that in anarcho-communism, or at least the form that Kropotkin is presenting, is that things exist, and if you need it, just go ahead and use it. So you don't have, after it's been paid off, there's no reason to continue to pay for, the use of that, of the museum or the library or the school or the meals, because everybody's been paid for it. There's no or at least everybody's been provided for to produce those things. Whereas in capitalism, it's like we mentioned before, this infinite rate of profit that I'm just going to keep profiting off the same thing no matter how long it goes and no matter whether or not my investment has been returned or not.
Well, it's exactly, the ANCAPs always talk about, how you need to have a state to have communism, but you need to have a state to have capitalism, because again...
Because who's going to enforce your infinite profit machine?
who's going to enforce your property rights and all this stuff? Because otherwise, the thing is that under capitalism, basically under anarcho-capitalism, what they're offering is, I think we said this last podcast, but it's the corporations become the state. That's basically all that happens. The corporations take over the role of the state and they do whatever they want.
Well,
And that's a big thing, is like, in capitalism, the one thing our best friend, we love you, won't admit is money is power. And if you have
Yes.
unregulated money, you have unregulated power.
Money is power, money is speech.
well, at least
Yeah.
in capitalism, yeah. And another big point is that even in a non-stated, and even in a stated capitalism, we have all these capitalists that are worshiping the free market, but they often forget that if you impose the free market directly onto a firm or a corporation, internally it falls apart. I mean, look at Sears. I'm actually referencing another podcast that talked about this, and General Intellect Unit. Just kind of shout out to those guys. They're fucking amazing, and this is kind of.
Can we just shout out every single podcast that's more popular than us so we can just
I like the cis are getting out of hand. They're fucking great.
But anyways,
we
like
can Clout Shark Fox this.
the point.
I'm sorry, what?
The point is that we have, even in a quote-unquote free market capitalism, we have in these corporations tiny command economies. Because if you have a full market based solely on the individual, not necessarily saying an individualist market, but a market based on the individual as a unit, you have infinite competition throughout and within the corporation. So you'll have independent departments competing against each other and crumbling the corporation to the ground. Whereas if you have, like an Amazon kind of deal in capitalism, you have a command economy about what goes where, how much we need to buy, how much that you need to sell. And that's how it functions. It's just command economies fighting against each other. So
it's working for the common good. Like he talks about a little bit later, just so we can move on a little bit. But he talks about kind of if my boat is sinking and I go to the lifeboat, I don't ask what the toll is, or I don't grab my credit card and say, how much, sir, lifeboat? No, you get to the lifeboat and you just use it, and then afterwards, whatever happens, happens, or if you have to pay for it afterwards, sure, whatever. But it's the idea of there's the command economies within corporations seek to have the goal of having the corporate, basically, they support. Instead of a command economy where everyone supports everyone else.
It's weird. In a corporation, you don't have to pay for the lifeboats either. You just have to prove that you're richer than the other guy.
Yeah, well, exactly. You have, in a corporation, you're working together to basically make a billionaire rich. But in the communist anarchist society, you're working together for the good of everyone rather than just the good of the rich person. And you get some bones, you get some scraps.
Yeah, but capitalists can't seem to perceive of working for the good of everyone without, putting everyone in rags. They literally cannot perceive of someone acting not on an impulse of greed.
Yeah, it's this really dumb naturalistic explanation where it's it's human nature to be to have competition.
Well, that's, if we're on desert island economics, then yes, you've got a point. But, we're
it's
not.
Everything in human nature is great. Human nature is, if I hear someone has murdered one of my friends, and I'm like, oh man, I'm pissed, I'm going to go out and kill them, and I do that, and it turns out he actually didn't murder my friend. That's not a good thing, even though I'm following human nature.
well,
It's kind of like that Liam Neeson deal. I understand where he's coming from. He's definitely, that's a wrong impulse to follow, but it's a human thing, and it happened. At least he fucking admits it.
It's almost like we have to sort of transcend human nature in that sense.
Well, I kind of also want to point
ahead of
out that even the discussion of human nature is kind of antagonistic to what Kropotkin is talking about, mostly because in his book Mutual Aid, he is pretty much saying that humans are both by nature, not even saying human nature, but looking at the evidence for evolution, there is no human nature to be greedy, because if everybody was focused solely on just themselves, the society would collapse. And even if in the same vein, if everybody was focused solely on what was best for the community and not for themselves, the individual would die.
It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's not an absolute, because only a cis deals in absolute. And yeah, so I just had to throw that joke in there.
No, I saw that in the chat earlier, and I was like, make the joke.
Yeah, we're welcome.
So kind of moving on.
Yeah.
He talks in part 2 of chapter 3 about how, if we observe the present development of civilized nations, we see most unmistakably a movement ever more and more marked tending to limit the sphere of action of government and allow more and more liberty to the individual. And this is kind of where he's coming from the same vein of, well, communism is inevitable. He's also saying that anarchy is inevitable. Because even going back to the first, because communism leads directly to anarchy and anarchy to communism, if one is inevitable, then they both are.
That's actually one thing I gotta like about ANCOMs, because even they'll at least admit that they like the idea of communism, or not communism. Well, actually, yeah, communism, but also anarchism. It's like, nobody wants somebody else telling them what the fuck to do. Like, that's just something everyone has in common, and we can get along on that.
So, the natural conclusion to that is that if your boss tells you what's something to do, just kill him.
Oh, that's a great... Wait, I'm my boss. Oh, shit.
Kill yourself! Oh!
My brain is telling my heart to do something. Therefore, I should kill my brain. That's a hierarchy.
That's a weird thing. Is the heart has its own
podcast.
It's a weird thing because the heart actually does have its own sort of nervous system. So the heart actually will beat after the brain is fucking dead.
Wait, are we becoming a medical podcast now? Are we just now authoritarian medical doctors?
All right.
No, just the heart is actually anarchist.
Getting back to furries, you see, we're going to talk about genitals and the genitals.
Okay.
Oh dear, I don't want to talk about.
Okay,
genitals.
We're getting too furry here. But so coming back to the source material, he actually even says after that things are arranged more easily and more satisfactorily without the intervention of a state. In studying the progress made in this direction, we led to conclude that the tendency of the human race is to reduce government interference to zero. In fact, to abolish the state, the personification of injustice, oppression, and monopoly.
I hate that game. That game is so boring.
I feel like you could attribute that quote to like Rand Paul, and people would eat it up.
Yeah.
So Rand Paul said that. You heard it here first. Rand Paul said that to us. We'd like them to come onto this podcast, but busy schedules.
Well, I would also like to point out like the increasingly, just kind of as a side note, the increasing amount of memes being used by right wingers and boomers, misattributing like Marx and other leftist thinkers' quotes to like Reagan or Nixon or things like that, and it's just like, are you kidding me?
Seize the memes.
Seize the memes.
Seize the memes.
Seize the memes of production.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is I can't wait to see a meme of Reagan just saying, all we have to lose is our chains.
JFK, don't ask what you can do for your country, but ask how you can lose your chains.
I forgot that was a Marx quote.
It's like the most well-known Marx quote.
I thought the most well-known Marx quote was "Seize the memes."
Well,
that too.
Yeah.
I thought it was "Workers of the World Unite."
Yeah, that was it too.
I thought it was "I want pictures of Spider-Man."
Look, Marx only said like 3 things, so that's all we.
Well, hold on. He said one more thing. Don't forget. Socialism is when the government does stuff. The more stuff the government does, the more socialism it is.
The more socialist it is. Yep.
Yeah.
All right, boys, we're a centrist podcast. we're moving all over the place.
But
soon we'll be in Nazareth.
Y'all boys.
Well, so coming off talking about dicks, let's talk about ballsack already.
Wait, hold up. When we were talking about dicks, I missed that.
So Balzac already remarked how millions of peasants peasants spend their whole lives without knowing anything about the state, save the heavy taxes they are compelled to pay. Every day, millions of transactions are made without government intervention, and the greatest of them, those of commerce and of the exchange, are carried on in such a way that the government could not be appealed to if one of the contracting parties had the intention of not fulfilling his agreement. Free market, anybody!
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like he has a lot of like those like free market ideas, which I think are interesting and like non-coercion. But like the issue is that they've been co-opted by
Coercious.
People who really truly don't understand it. Like you can see the idea of like classical liberalism and kind of how that sort of bleeds into more of the libertarian idea and kind of is corrupted in that sense. You can also see how it leads to this. So it's like a diverging path.
Yeah, and I think this also like even points out, because he even talks about earlier in the chapter, we kind of even glossed over it, we kind of skipped over it, about how, even Marxist economics was based on Ricardo and Adam Smith, the two biggest names in capitalist theory, even pre-capitalism, at least in terms of naming the game. And he takes this and is basically saying that even in communism, even in full anarcho-communism, there is still some level of interaction that can be attributed to what would traditionally be called a market.
Exactly.
And markets are fine. That's the thing. It's like when people say capitalism is inevitable, they're conflating capitalism with literally every market, and that's just like, nah, though.
And I think that's
nah.
I think that's one of my
I
favorite.
couldn't have said it more eloquent.
Wait, what?
I think that's one of my more favorite points that I like to bring up against any kind of capitalist or anarcho-capitalist. And it's like, markets aren't solely capitalist. They existed for millennia before capitalism existed, and they'll exist for millennia after. Capitalism is a very distinct feature of our modern society. And to say that capitalism is just trading things, you are just reducing the entire argument so much that ultimately your argument is, well, if I wanted to give somebody something and they wanted to give me money in return, checkmate communists!
I mean,
Well,
the way
that-
anarcho-capitalists think also is they don't recognize that anything is ever actually produced. They act like things are just exchanged into existence.
Well,
That's also true. But I was gonna say also just like it's making the argument. Did you know that actually, if anything having to do with markets is actually mercantilism, and so therefore mercantilism is inevitable, and you must give up all your sugar to the state, to the crown.
And this is why I'm gathering the Infinity Gems.
yeah, let's just go. I mean, who would you sacrifice for the Soul Stone?
I'm sorry, didn't catch all that. You were cutting out something fierce.
Oh, who would you sacrifice for the Soul Stone?
Oh,
no,
wait, I was like, Rasa? Oh, wait, someone I like.
But Rasa's our best friend. What are you talking about?
Yeah, no, Rasa's our friend. We love Rasa.
But
please don't sue us. We'll give you 5 Bitcoin to not sue us.
Oh Jesus, I don't have that kind of money.
Yeah, no, it's like heart.
Crickets.
Yeah. It's like real hours. All I have to say about Adam Smith is I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what his Fursona would be. What is Adam Smith's Fursona?
It would be an
Who the
apple.
fuck is Adam Smith?
Who the fuck's Adam Smith?
I said that.
Get out. You are officially cast out from this podcast. You are the weakest link.
Thank you.
Adam Smith, more like Jonathan Swift. Am I right?
Ooh! But yeah, I kind of do want to. Sorry.
He hasn't blocked me.
I kind of do want to cycle back to what Zulikath said about, the anarcho-communists kind of they expect things to just be traded into existence. There is no production, and I can actually see this in Kropotkin's writings, mostly because like when he's talking about at least the public goods, he's like, well, they already exist, so let's just use them. But there comes a point where even bridges and roads fall into disarray, so ultimately we might end up having to put more labor into it. So, how do you attribute the extra labor beyond just people, going out and being super anarchist and being like, hey, let's just fill the potholes because we got a problem here.
I mean, that would be pretty fucking direct. It'd be better than having Pizza Hut and Pornhub do it.
Yeah.
This pothole sponsored by Pornhub.
You know, at least Pornhub doesn't put their fucking logo on the potholes they fill.
Yeah. And I would also like, so continuing from just to kind of round out the chapter, you know, that idea of things are just exchanged into existence, he kind of talks about, at the end, a free society regaining possession of the common inheritance must seek in free groups and free federations of groups a new organization in harmony with the new economic phase of history. So, he kind of doesn't really talk, at least these two chapters, about what the next economic phase is, besides kind of hand-waving towards communism. So, like, I'm kind of hoping that, you know, in the later chapters, he kind of talks about, well, what's going to happen when capitalism is fully dismantled? What's going to happen when we achieve anarcho-communism, and how are the markets, how is the economy going to look?
Yeah, it's almost like Marx's interpretation of history, where this is also another thing I have a problem with some of the 19th century authors. They have a very linear understanding of history, where history is more fluid, like especially with you know, kind of going back to Russia, the Mensheviks. They really had this idea of, well, first we go from agrarian society, and then we go to capitalism, and then we go to socialism. And it's accelerationism essentially, where you have to push things to the limit, and then you have to go from this stage in history to this stage. But history is much more fluid than that, and a lot more complex than that idea. And you can actually regress from the idea that history is always a march forward in progress is just simply not true. Like,
it's not strictly linear.
Well,
yeah, exactly. It's linear.
Capitalism doesn't always have to be fucking puberty.
Well,
exactly.
I kind of disagree in that interpretation of Marx, because even though I don't like Marx to the extent that a lot of people tend to, his idea of historical dialectics was material dialectics for historics. It was not, oh, well, we have these periods. He was more like, so we have a current phase, we have a movement that goes against that phase, and then the phase after that is a synthesis. So bringing Hegel in, the dialectics is the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, where you have like an idea.
It's not a phase, Mom. I'm a real capitalist.
I think I was more talking about the interpretation by Russian, like more the Marxist, not even Marxist-Leninist, but really like the kind of almost Trotskyist like idea of how interpreting Marx and that kind of thing. Fair. Where it's like that's a very Russian idea, and that sort of led to authoritarian communism in the Soviet Union. So that's sort of where I was coming from that, but I see your point.
Okay. Well, and I think actually, just to kind of start chapter 4 out, I think this is a good segue, because even a lot of times we discuss about reappropriation in terms of communism to kind of level the playing field. I think a lot of people tend to think that we have to use the state to reappropriate. And even Kropotkin says something like, what we want is not a redistribution of overcoats, although it must be said that even in such a case, the shivering folk will see an advantage of it, nor do we want to divide the wealth up with the Rothschilds. What we do want is to arrange things that every human being born into the world shall be assured the opportunity, in the first instance, of learning some useful avocation and becoming skilled in it, and next he shall be free to work it as a trade without asking leave of master or owner, and without handing over the landlord or capitalist the lion's share of what he produces. And this kind of goes against that authoritarian system of reappropriation, where he's not saying, well, let's take all of the money from everybody else and just give it to everybody who needs it. No, we're kind of okay with, you know, people having things and having money. We just think that the system that currently exists is not, it's not democratic enough, and it's not giving people enough opportunity to develop their skills and work where they want. And that's going back to, you know, chapter 1 and 2, where he's like, well, we have these factories that are just lying dormant, and people need these goods.
Exactly. It was almost like, I also want to point out that in this chapter, Kropotkin is confirmed to be a Rothschild shill. Just Illuminati confirmed. Like, just kind of like going off of that, like the Rothschild thing, like, that kind of took me for a loop because I always think of it in like the modern definition of like conspiratorial, like Illuminati, like crazy person talk. But like back then, like the Rothschilds were just a bunch of rich people.
Mm-hmm.
So like I was thinking about that and I was like, man, is there going to be like in 100 years like a Bezos conspiracy where people are calling people like Jeff Bezos because they have tons of money, or like saying that like the Jews were actually funded by Jeff Bezos or something?
Well, hold on. Don't forget to make a shout out to the person that's funding this entire thing, George Soros.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, right, yeah.
I just got my Soros bucks in the mail. It was a little tight this month, Georgie. I've been working hard.
Yeah,
Honestly,
gotta
I
smash all those
surprised.
Starbucks windows,
Yeah, I've been spreading around tons of homosexual porn, just tons of it, and just corrupting everyone. And he hasn't given me my due. What the fuck?
Well, this is why we have no gods, no masters, because we need to overthrow George Soros. We need to overthrow George Soros so that we could actually get the money that we're owed by George Soros.
Exactly. We put in the labor to produce this propaganda. We should get all the value from it.
But I'm actually with you on this, Con, because like it did kind of throw me in through a loop about the Rothschilds and how he kind of was defending them, but he even says
he's trying to understand them.
He even says so far so good, say our critics, but you will have Rothschilds coming in from outside. How are you to prevent a person from amassing millions in China and then settling again amongst you? And he's kind of pointing out this age-old anti-anarchist, thought. Well, what are you gonna do about people who just don't want to work in your system? Huh?
Well, then kick them out.
What about all the NEETs and the welfare queens?
Yeah, right.
It was actually the welfare queens. The kulaks were the first welfare queens. I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay.
So therefore, the kulaks, they kind of had it coming. They were welfare queens,
All right, we are now a tanky podcast. All hail Stalin. He didn't commit genocide. There was no
real
death
talk
toll.
With Stalin, though, he was
nothing
actually
happened
sexy.
in Hungary. Don't worry about it.
But
like if you look at Stalin when he was like in his 20s, he was a fucking snack.
I do want to.
I would fuck Stalin.
I do want to make like a.
All right, that's gonna be the episode title. Episode 2. I would fuck Stalin.
He was a snack. I do.
Stalin was thick.
I do also want to point out this really funny quote. This really funny part about in that same quote. Well then, are you going to establish custom houses on your frontiers to search all who enter your country and then confiscate the money they bring with them? Anarchist policemen firing on travelers would be a fine spectacle. And I just want to point out the oxymoron of anarchist policemen. Just right there.
I think that was
like,
the point in that. Like, that was the gag. But also, it's like, okay, congratulations. You took a bunch of wealth from this country, and you brought their money into the anarchist society. And it's like, I will buy stuff for this money in this anarchist society. And we're just looking at this guy like, what the fuck do you think you're going to do with that shit?
Exactly. It's like a post-scarcity society. It's like almost like Star Trek in that sense.
Yeah.
It's like
I have
idea.
dollars. What do we do with those?
It's like, yeah, we don't need money. We already have all the stuff.
Like what are you doing with dollars? The best you could do is roll a blunt.
I actually, so coming off of this, I actually do want to point out there's actually a really active anarchist community. I think it's called Twin Oaks. Where is it? Twin Trees or something?
I keep thinking of Twin Peaks, but that's not right.
Yeah, no, I think it's Twin Trees. No, never mind. I can't remember. It's something to do with trees, and basically what they have is it's a small community that has basically abolished money, but they still interact with the outside capitalist realm, and they're not necessarily anarchists, but they're more socialist than most communities in modern day are. Beyond Cuba, stand for Cuba. Let's go. But they don't have a really an internal monetary system, but they do still function by imports and exports and still maintain the currency of the outside world and interacting with the outside world.
Well, yeah, if once you live in a post-scarcity society and that the only things that are markets are things that are luxuries, then you really don't care about you're not going your whole economy is not going to collapse because you have all the basic means that you already have, and you're not going to be overpaying or underpaying for anything that you basically need, which is like food, water, shelter, that sort of thing. And that's, I think, what, like, in my view of anarchism is like, you can keep a lot of some of these, like, luxury markets and, like, things like that you don't need to survive, but so long as, like, as people have what they need and have, like, a purpose in life, then generally you're just going to be pretty good. You don't need capitalism for that. You shouldn't commodify everything. That's why I especially hate the modern-day neoliberalism, is because that is the antithesis of... It commodifies everything. It commodifies human life. It commodifies just everything is a market, and everything can be bought and sold, and everything has a profit margin.
Oh,
and that's what I hate about it.
Yeah, like
this is like Kropotkin would be rolling in his grave if he saw what like neoliberalism and globalization has done.
Oh, honestly, we could harness the rolling into his grave as like an energy source right now.
Well, and like neoliberalism has actually brought to the current capitalist economy the gig economy. The fact that, I'm just going to work, this one job that's going to give me, income every so often, and it's not going to be a stable source of income. And that's like peak neoliberalism, because, to them, it's like the greatest thing ever that, that corporations don't have to pay, benefits or even a stable income. It's just, well, you make them a profit, they'll make you a profit. Let's go.
Exactly. It's trickle-down economics and like Reaganomics and that sort of thing. But I have an interesting take on this with just regarding almost the furry community, because like in normal neoliberal thought, there's really not a whole lot of room for art, because art is not seen as something you can't make a whole lot of profit off it. You put work into it, and but how are you going to sell that to people other than like you might put it in the store, but if there's no really room for art as like a critique of reality and a critique of society. It's more seen as, this is a product that I make, how can I sell this, rather than, well, it's helping us view the world, and that value is lost. And I think that one of the things I like about the furry community almost is that we treat our artists actually very, very well. And there is almost like a capitalist microcosm within the community where it's like, commissions cost a lot and art costs a lot and yada, yada, yada. But it's almost like we're supporting each other, because in normal, like, neoliberal society, there's no room for these people who want to just express themselves and hone their talent. And they want to do what they want. But in neoliberalism, it's, all right, good, get a 9-to-5 job, work your way up. It's positivism as well. It's the idea that anything that isn't STEM is automatically wrong, and you're not doing things to progress humanity, so therefore you're not making profit for people, so therefore you are worthless. And so arts students and more artsy people are excluded. And that's kind of why we have this furry enclave, is because of that exclusion. It brings people together. It almost brings people together. It's like we almost have our own commune, if you will.
Yeah, and it's almost like, in the book, to kind of bring it back to the source material, it's almost like Kropotkin had actually anticipated the resurgence of liberalism, because he's even talking about how, the secret of wealth is finding the starving and destitute, paying them half a crown, and they make them produce 5 shillings worth in the day. 5 shillings is a full crown, so you're paying them half of what they make you. And that's how you amass the fortune, by, increasing it through speculation made with some help from the state. So you're sitting here, you're finding, the people who are the most desperate to make it income, which is where the gig economy comes in. You're finding these people that are the most desperate, and you're saying, hey, I'll give you enough to barely survive if you just make me a shit ton of profit.
And
Exactly.
They'll do that if they're desperate enough. Like, people who are backed far enough into a corner will take literally any deal you offer them, and it might even look good to them, but it's definitely inequality of bargaining power.
You see, it's you guys are just against the free enterprise of people. They agreed to their job. If they don't like it, they can just get a new job.
Agreement a contract made in the context of if a contract is the product of aggression, even if it's not aggression by the person that you're contracting with, that's still enough in my mind to at least impeach the contract, if not completely get rid of it.
Oh yeah, and contract law, the contract, like in the law, like we have this on like the books, and this has been known for years. Like it's fairly null and void. Like if you're coerced into doing something, if I put a gun to your head and then said, "Hey, write me a check for $20 million," and you do it, and then you take me to court, I wouldn't be like it was under his own volition because he could have said no, and he could have said no.
Like, again, our laws don't seem to recognize the coercion that does happen under capitalism, today.
Yeah, it's systemic. It's systemic instead of just being an individual, the same person that you're contracting with. So at the systemic level, you don't really get that defense anymore.
And it kind of comes back to this idea of a generation of oligarchy in capitalism when faced with competition, because when it comes to worker wages, like if the powers that be, the larger corporations decide, well, across the board, we're going to pay, the workers X amount of dollars, then going to another corporation isn't going to change anything because you're going to get paid the same. Because you'll be like, well, that's just the market value of what the work is right now. So,
and the worst part is it can be a completely unconscious agreement. They don't even have to be talking to each other to come to this agreement.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's a race to the bottom where you just have to make the most profit. And like even then, like when people talk about how, capitalism's all about creativity and has the most stuff. Well, if capitalism was about creativity, they would honor artists more. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. And B, if capitalism...
they see an artist and they say, get a real job.
Exactly. And B, if capitalism is about creativity, then why are like some of the people who are paid the most literally just speculators who are just using other people's money to like gamble?
It's actually really funny. I kind of want to point out that Ayn Rand, the prophet of capitalism, even in her book Atlas Shrugged, the entire book's premise is, all the artists and everybody who was creative just like, we didn't feel valued, so we're just gonna leave. Bye. And they all just dipped out. And the resulting society is just a crass dystopia.
Oh man, did you actually read all of Atlas Shrugged?
No, I couldn't get through half of it. Are you kidding me?
I was gonna be like, you poor boy.
I got halfway through it.
Yeah, I think anybody with half a brain can only get like halfway through most of Ayn Rand's work without, fearing the brain.
Didn't they make a movie?
Yeah, they did.
Well, they keep promoting. Goddamn, YouTube keeps promoting it to me to watch fucking Ayn Rand videos, and I'm like, no, I don't want to watch Ayn Rand go off
I watched
about some random bullshit.
The first movie, and it was at least pretty true to the book as far as movie adaptations of books go. So if you don't want to read a 1,000-page book...
Is there riff tracks of that?
Hmm?
Is there like a riff tracks or MST3K of
Oh, I would so
Atlas Shrugged?
I would watch that. I don't know.
We need to do that on our first... If we ever do like a
Yeah, we can do a movie-based one after this.
Yeah.
Like,
Fuck yes.
Conquest of Trades.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Man, pirating Ayn Rand is the ultimate anarchist move.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Is this praxis? and kind of coming back
Well, I don't know. Is there a broken window? Because if not, then no, it ain't.
I kind of want to come back to this. Like,
shit.
Kropotkin even said, nowadays, a merchant who has some capital need not stir from his desk to become wealthy. He telegraphs it to an agent to telling him to buy 100 tons of tea, freights it in a ship, and in a few weeks and 3 months, if it's a sailing ship, the vessel brings him his cargo. He does not take even the risks of the voyage, for his tea and his vessel are insured. And it's kind of like the pinnacle of neoliberalism / capitalism of how, I don't have to do the work to make money, I just have to pay somebody else to do the work for me.
It's the idea of like transport, and like he talks about this in here. Like I think he makes a very interesting point where it's like people then say, oh, it costs money to transport stuff, and it's kind of hard to like track across all these areas. But at the same time, the people that make the most money off of it are not the ones actually transporting. Like the ship captain. Like if that was the case, then the ship captains and like people who are out at sea who are transporting all this stuff, yeah, they make a decent amount of money, but they would make all of the money. But the reality is the people who are making the most money are the people who are just calling the shots.
Yeah.
And just organizing things.
Everywhere you will
calling
find...
the shots is a generous way to put it.
Yeah.
Although
everywhere you will find...
They have power, but they're not doers.
Everywhere you will find that the wealth of the wealthy springs from the poverty of the poor. This is what we mean when we talk of expropriation, which is the title of this chapter, expropriation. This will be our duty during the revolution, for whose coming we will look, not 200 years hence, but soon, very soon. And
this is one of the things like I kind of have a problem with as well, is like always trying to predict the future in a lot of certainties, and like talking about the revolution being soon, it kind of reminds me of almost the Christian idea of, the resurrection will be soon, we're coming soon, so we have to prepare for it, we have to do things for it, rather than, I think it almost builds a place of complacency wherein you almost have to say, look, the revolution happens when the people will it. You have to go out there and get people to say, we are going to have a revolution, this is what do you agree with me, let's do it. And you have to get people on board. Also, did that revolution last? It lasted till the 90s-ish. I would say it lasted basically until the 80s-ish. And even then, you can talk about that's not really an anarchist revolution, and it's not really achieving full communism as well. So there's that caveat.
Like, it doesn't have to be, specifically, I guess, for you, revolution, but it'd be good enough to make the world better than when we came in, right?
Yeah, that's kind of humanism, and that's why I like about Kropotkin. He's very humanistic and very even though like I said, I think with kind of my criticism of Kropotkin and Marx, they focus a lot on kind of Europe, but that's where they were grown up in. That's where their cultural milieu they were steeped in that cultural milieu. So for them to talk about like other parts of the world, like Asia or South America, or like any other system where the economic systems, capitalism does have an effect, but it's slightly different, and those perspectives are needed. But it's they're talking about it from the European perspective, which is kind of represented a lot, I believe.
yeah, well, and I also do want to point out that, it was 1917 when the revolution was, and Kropotkin is a Russian, and he fought in the revolution of 1917, so he was backing that. And I think that's mostly because, like, his idea of communism was like, well, it leads to anarchy, so if we have a communist revolution, even if it goes through the state, the state will slowly wither away. And this this is a cementation of what Marx was saying about how, well, the way that we go through to communism is by using the state, and because we have the class consciousness being revered, and we have, the establishment of a classless society, slowly the state will wither away without class.
Okay,
so it's basically, you get your communist revolution, and then you just sit on it until anarchism takes a hold, because,
If you buy one communism, you get one anarchism free.
Yeah, and I'm kind of...
Well, the weird thing is, like, treating something like it's inevitable. Like, in any case, everybody has said that their philosophy of how things are going to go is inevitable.
Yeah, it's the end of history, and Fukuyama was like, liberalism's great! We did all this stuff! Then 2008 comes, and it just fucks everything.
And I actually
at least we had Halo 3 in 2007, so...
Oh, yeah.
I kind of want to make a side note here, that, like... Even if we move forward in history a little bit, the post-Marxists and even like the 20th century philosophers, or the late 20th century philosophers, had this idea that, well, we can't just assume that things are going to happen, because we have a cultural hegemony that we have to fight against. We have to sit there and actually perform some kind of cultural revolution, either on a macro or micro scale, to have people accept the fact that revolution is necessary, or accept the fact that anarchy is inevitable, or accept the fact that communism is inevitable. Because if they're sitting here like neoliberals are and assuming that capitalism is just the natural state of things, then it will be the natural state of things.
That's the other thing, is like, things will change. The only reason we actually need revolution is because there are people in power who are invested in making things not change. Things are the way they like.
They have a monopoly on force.
Yeah. People with a monopoly on force have a vested interest in making things stay the way they are because it works specifically for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll try to extrapolate it and say then it works for all of society because they have no empathy.
Yeah, fuck you, got mine.
Yeah. That's essentially it. And they'll fight to keep it the same way, and when a revolution becomes necessary, or when they put down a revolution, they'll say, see, this was inevitable because it's the right way.
And I think Kropotkin kind of walks back on this idea of inevitability, because he even says later on, all is interdependent in a civilized society. It is impossible to reform any one thing without altering the whole. Therefore, on the day that a nation will strike at private property, under any one of its forms, territorial or industrial, it will be obliged to attack them all. The very success of a revolution will impose it.
Like, failure to do it on the whole would, result in going back to a... I lost my train of thought.
Sorry, my daughter's having fun here.
No, that's fine. Fun is great. Some of us have to be having fun, right?
Those leftists are indoctrinating the children. How dare you, sir? I'm calling CPS for talking about Karl Marx in front of my beautiful, beautiful child. Can your daughter be a host on the podcast? What does she have to say about anarchism?
I think she says, I really don't care as long as I get fed. Which actually is a good point, because a lot of people, to kind of attack the cultural hegemony, that's one of the big things that people kind of have an issue with, at least conceptualizing the future of the anarchist, the communist society, is they have these misconceptions, or at least predispositions towards what that would mean. Because you have the modern definitions of socialism and communism saying, well, what about the bread lines? And I'm not going to have my fucking iPhone. Jesus, what am I going to do without my iPhone? And you kind of have to sit down, and that's one of the goals of this podcast. Sit down and be like, listen, you're not going to be losing your iPhone, and you're going to be able to eat as long as you sit here and you function appropriately.
It's like, you're going to do less work, and
we're all able to eat. We got food.
Yeah.
That's all
Capitalism didn't make shit. Labor did.
Mm-hmm. We currently are in just a world of prosperity. I don't know what these dang socialists are talking about. I'm sitting here in this McDonald's, and I see people typing on their MacBooks and getting their food as fast as possible. That's capitalism at work. Socialism can't have that.
Food. I mean, you're sitting in a McDonald's talking about food. I'm not quite sure what's going on here.
People always talk about how the Soviet Union didn't have food, but can we realize that, is processed food and just like Burger King and McDonald's and Taco Bell, is that really food?
Like, again, it works if you're high. It works really great if you're high.
But
that reminds me, last podcast, I think I had to take out a part of you just hitting a sick rip on the bong, just right into the mic.
No, you edited out the bong rip?
I don't know if I haven't edited it fully, but I was thinking about it. I just remember hearing that, and I was like, I'm probably going to have to edit that out.
Yeah, no, I was wondering about that. I was like, that might not work in that. Should I? Because we were asking about it before we started recording. I was like, should I do the bong rip before, or should I add that as flavor?
Yeah.
All right, so kind of let's get to the end of this chapter, and
we're kind of on the last page, because it's funny because we actually naturally led to food, and the next chapter is food, and he kind of leads into this in the end of the chapter, going about how the same argument about how the popular common sense has got the better of this subtle distinction. We are not savages who can live in the woods without other shelter within the branches. The civilized man needs a roof, a room, and a hearth and a bed. It is the place where the nerves and sinew gather strength for the work of the morrow. The rest of the workman is the daily repairing of the machine. And he's talking about how, in these economies, we point to the Soviet Union about breadlines, but we have breadlines in capitalism. We have people starving in capitalism. We have
the weird thing is how there is a distinction though between how employers treat the living machines in their companies, i.e. the workers, and the literal machines. And this is just going off experience, though. They treat the literal machines so much better than they treat the living machines.
Well, let's inject some Deleuze again. All people are machines. Everything is a machine. Ah!
That is actually my kink, so...
Whoa. So what you're saying is that the robot uprising actually has already happened?
Yeah.
Just
there
us.
is a robot
We are the
uprising
robot
happening, if you know what I
uprising.
mean.
Well, just to kind of just for the listeners who don't
Gonna
know
have to edit that
Deleuze's
out.
argument, he was basically saying that everything that exists is just a machine seeking connections with other machines.
But also, what the fuck is a hearth?
It's like a fireplace.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've never heard the phrase hearth used in a goddamn sentence until now.
Hearthstone? You never heard of Hearthstone? Another product of capitalism, you see.
I thought
You
that
wanna
was
give up
just a video
Hearthstone?
game.
Yeah, you want to give up Magic the Gathering? You know, all those thousands of dollars you invested into your deck to play once a month?
You know, it's really weird because despite being on hormones for like 4 years, I have not spent more than $15 on Magic the Gathering.
Well, we're gonna change that here. If you ain't playing Magic the Gathering and supporting Wizards of the Coast as our capitalist overlords, then what are you doing?
We are now state sanctioned capitalist podcast. Welcome to our podcast.
Yeah, I just wanted to just kind of finish things off. Just we kind of had a discussion. I got my thoughts on like, what do you think the furry community has to do with anarchism, and what do you think it has to do with sort of just furries and politics in general? Or just what are your thoughts on it?
It's a bit disturbing. I want to say the furry community is pretty anarchist in and of itself, but there's also there's a hierarchy of popularity in the furry community.
Well, let's also forget about circles and closed species that exist.
Oh, yeah, sir. Well, look, here's the thing about circles. I like cheese. I'm a Minnesotan. I like cheese.
My next Fursona is going to be a circle made out of cheese, and it's going to be the walking contradiction.
So, literally every circle, then.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
But let's be real, Kaisuros are way cooler than circles anyways.
I wouldn't...
Protogens are bae.
I mean,
they
I
have
wouldn't call it a
multiple buttholes.
hierarchy. I wouldn't call it a hierarchy of popularity because even in a truly anarchist society, there are still latent systems of power that need to be addressed. Because if every interaction was a one-on-one interaction, if someone's being bullied, then you can't have someone step in and be like, "Hey, dude, you gotta fucking stop doing that. It's not cool."
Well, if you didn't have if you were in anarchy, why don't you have laws and people would just kill each other?
Yeah. You mean
God, I hate that.
if it's anarchy, you mean I can kill you? You want me to kill you, right? That's what you want, right?
And here's the fun thing: the
answer
hierarchy
to that is you say yes,
of
and I want to die.
if there's a hierarchy of like popularity, like I said previously, there is still a counter argument to that, and that's that, you know, remember when Jasonifex decided to shit the bed and did not expect everyone to, you know, say, "Hey, fuck off"?
Yeah.
I think
Like,
that
popularity
one of the
does
things-
not guarantee you will get away with everything.
Well, that one of the things with the community is we've gotten a lot better about policing ourselves. Like the furry community 10 years ago was much more abundant with like a lot of the recent zoophile stuff and like hero stuff. Like that would never have happened 10 years ago. People are much more because like the problem is that we're a bunch of misfits and we're used to being treated intolerantly, so automatically we circle the wagons whenever one of our in-group, if you will, going into Saeed territory and the otherization of people, but whenever someone in our in-group is threatened, we sort of circle the wagons and defend them, no matter how heinous their crimes. But now we're starting to see that, okay, we can't do that because it gives the community a bad name. We have to police ourselves and protect ourselves, because that's ultimately what it's about.
Well, it's not even just that. It's just also we're a bunch of misfits, and there are people in our community who will treat other people in our community like shit because they're a different kind of misfit than they are.
Well, it's that, and also like predatory people in the community who take advantage of the fact that the furry community is very, very open. And very,
We're vulnerable.
Yeah, it's a lot of vulnerable people trying to come to terms with themselves is really what all it is.
Well, and you also like the whole what's been going on recently. Like you wouldn't see that 10 years ago because also we still didn't have, as a furry community 10 years ago, have the media presence that we do today. Like,
I mean,
I remember when the first news article broke about, oh, this is a furry and what does that mean, and thinking, holy crap, we're actually being represented in the media. People actually know who we are, and now even.
But now we're circling the wagons against that because then we realize, oh shit, capitalism is coming. Better double down on the weird fetishes, guys.
Yeah.
Well, that's the best part about furrydom is like all the weird niche fetishes that people like and support. Consensual fetishes. I think one of the biggest things that people get mixed up is like when we talk about like zoophiles. Zoophiles should not. I believe
Like, zoophiles are the most fucked up, but also most vanilla thing you could possibly get out of furries, and that's why we're trying to get them out of furries.
exactly because they're not furries. It's about consent. Animals cannot consent.
And also, let's be real, as far as furries go, vor is vanilla.
Vor is pretty vanilla. I mean, there's like weird stuff, but like people like I understand the argument some to a certain extent where it's like, oh, you know, you don't want to have people just try to do too extreme things in order to hurt themselves, but it's all about, you know, if it's not hurting anyone and it's not like a public health risk or anything, then I think it should be perfectly fine.
Can we actually have like a very brief discussion about how as the furry community continues on and develops more and more weird fetishes, we actually stray away from actual sexual action and start fetishizing things that aren't sexual in nature?
Well, it's the idea of everyone does this. Foot fetishes.
That's actually a weird thing with the foot fetishing in furries, because that went from a fetish to just being a thing, because everybody likes... The beans are precious, whether you're getting off them or not.
Well, I wouldn't even necessarily say a foot fetish is asexual, because I actually got into a discussion with somebody that was arguing that the feet are actually the closest things to the genitals beyond, you know, the genitals themselves. So it naturally follows that if you're on your knees, you know, sucking a big ass monster donkey dick, then you're going to naturally associate your feet with your genitals.
Yeah, I don't understand that at all. I'm sorry. I'm one of those people who doesn't have a foot fetish, and I had a discussion with someone who's like, I would like to get a foot fetish just to know what I'm missing out on. And the answer to that was like, if you don't already have one, then you're not gonna have one. I'm sorry.
I wish that was like people saying, I wish I could become gay, or I wish I could, you know, I wish I was trans.
Oh,
Yeah, no, there's a meme on that.
It's like that dysphoria.
I actually found it when I first started getting into the furry community. I actually knew somebody who lamented that he wasn't gay because there are so many gay people in the community that he felt so alone. And I'm just like, you know...
Have you tried fucking one of the gay people?
Wait,
it might help.
Yeah, right? Like... And I guess we need to kind of wrap up this podcast because we're starting to run a little long. But just kind of like a closing note, like I do want to make a remark about how the sexualization of identity has become a thing. Like a couple centuries ago, you know, having sex with people of the same gender or same sex was not a thing. Like you were still straight if you fucked a dude. Ain't no big deal.
Actually, a couple centuries ago, well. The whole sexuality, sexuality has gone through some ups and downs in history, but yeah.
I think the point is like we're seeing like an acceptance of the idea of gender being more fluid and sexuality being more fluid and these things not being stuck in stone and the human mind being really fucking weird and
like the modern conception of gender and sexuality is different from the lifelong history-long conception.
Well, that's why the furry community is
like
generally a very young community, 20s to 30s, because like the boomer sort of timeline. Well, you know, furries really didn't exist back then, but even if they did, I think
Disney.
They just couldn't make effective communities back then.
They did have some, but they didn't have as much traction. My point is that there was more. It was much more fixed in their gender roles. Like even in the hippie movement, they still had fairly strong gender roles in that movement. And
yeah, honestly, someone like Julia Serrano today would look at the hippies of last generation and think they were regressive.
Exactly. A lot of people make that argument. I've heard people make that argument.
I've made that argument.
So
I'm gonna make that argument.
I would agree.
So let's go ahead.
Oh shit, I'm right. Oh fuck.
Let's go ahead and make our closing remarks about. So how did we feel about these two chapters? Like, what was the general idea that we pulled from it? Do we want to kind of like make any comments about what we read and how it may tie into the current modern system?
Kropotkin is a circle.
Did you make that decision?
I mean,
he talks about, well, the next chapter he talks about food, and
Okay, so next chapter is all about Vor. Obviously, as a small shark and fox, I'm clearly recording from the stomach of Zukaleth here. That's just how it works.
So any closing remarks about these last two chapters? You know, how we felt about it?
Well,
how we kind
it's weird how he predicted basically how corporations would treat their employers. But also,
really predict it. Like, it was happening back then, it's still happening today.
Yeah.
Like, the big difference is, I guess the human machine is infinitely replaceable, unlike the unlike the sexy machine.
That is exactly the opposite of reality.
Well, yeah, but that's how they treat it.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Well,
I get it. The mechanical machines are sexier, but
so we just need to make machines that fucking reproduce.
Well, I do want to point out that, like, it wasn't a prediction. It was more like what we see today is not different in kind from what was occurring during Marx's and Kropotkin's time. It's just different in severity. Like, back then,
in scale.
Yeah, like back then, you would produce a pair of shoes that cost $1, you get paid cost $1, you get paid half a crown for it. Whereas today, you'd make a pair of shoes that cost $90, you get paid $5 for it.
Yeah, it's weird because, again, everything that's happening today has happened in their time and or was predicted by them. But again, they didn't think it would be as bad as it is, and it'd be like that. Like, honestly, if Marx saw what the world is today, we would literally have Communist Manifesto 2.
Well, and I think that's because, like, but when they were in the time of their writing, they kind of assumed that we would no longer be in capitalism by this point. Because, like, even back in the 60s and 70s, we were reaching a point of critical mass in terms of starvation wages and profit gains by the capitalist, that they would have predicted that people would just be fed up with it. Whereas nowadays, with the propaganda through neoliberalism and even neoconservatism, we are seeing that these people become increasingly okay with it.
Well, I think the thing is like neoliberalism ultimately has failed because people are still fed up with the system, and it was supposed to be the alternative to communism, the alternative to socialism, where it's like, you guys like liberty, right? You guys like, doing stuff. Well, we'll give you that, but don't question capitalism. Other than
there's
that,
also the Red Scare is like a huge factor in that. Is like any form of socialism or communism was like totally demonized, like to the point where you had ordinary. Oh god, she's drinking that. That's not a glass or bottle.
Are you watching porn?
No, I'm well, sort of. It's someone.
Well, sort of.
But
she's drinking the bong water.
Oh,
Ew.
But so. I guess final remark is that neoliberalism presented capitalism with a new face, but it didn't solve the problems. It just exacerbated them, right?
It put a Band-Aid on it.
Yeah, and people have responded to the propaganda of neoliberalism with, oh, well, that's just the way things are, I guess. And you're right, it came a lot from the Red Scare, but I think that's mostly because, quoting Marx, when the socialism was the state does stuff, and the more the state does, the more socialister it is.
And ironically, in that sense, the state did a lot of stuff to stop socialism or communism. Mm-hmm. Just a little thonk emoji there.
Just big thonk.
Yeah, seriously.
But anyways, So subscribe, like us on YouTube, give us money on our Patreon, whatever we decide to do.
We have a Patreon?
I haven't set it up yet, but feel free to give me just even though we want all for all, we're going to be capitalist about this podcast, and we're going to.
Unfortunately, we have to play the game.
Yeah. Hey, if you see us on the street,
really
hand us a $5 and say big thanks. Big thanks for the gay furry scene, guys.
I also take money in the form of blowjobs. Just throwing that out there. Like if you see me on the street and just. We're talking about feet, you see my feet, I'll see your feet, and yeah.
Yeah, if you like this podcast, give me estradiol cypionate.
Mutual foot
like
jobs
a lot
for everybody.
of it. What is with... I still don't understand. God damn it, I wish I had a foot fetish.
All right, that's gonna end it.
Yep.
That's it.
So thank you guys.
Podcast got a little sexier than I expected.